Welcome back to the NYGunGuys podcast. My name is John.
My name is Taylor.
Taylor.
Yeah, man.
What are we talking about today?
Oh, boy. Well, we're talking about one of my favorite guns. We're going to be talking about the infamous SKS rifle. So, as we did with the M1 Garand episode, I brought by a couple of SKSs. So, John has one in his hand, and
I do.
I have one in my hand here.
Hold
so,
on, let me give mine a...
Give a little safety check, little rack, even though they were safety checked beforehand, and safety is number one. So we like to make sure we're safe when we're handling firearms.
Physical and visible inspection.
Yeah. Yes. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the SKS. For those who don't know, I'm going to give just a little spiel about some history, some interesting variants, real quick. So the SKS is a semi-automatic carbine chambered in 7.62 by 39. Which is the same caliber that the AK-47 takes. It's designed in 1943 by Sergei Simonov. It was adopted in 1945, and it was given the designation in English, the self-loading carbine of the Simonov system, 1945. So, one of the best things about this, now getting into more specifically New York State, is that it features a permanently attached folding bayonet and a hinged non-detachable magazine. So, for New York, this is a semi-automatic rifle that has a fixed magazine that was originally designed as a fixed magazine and fires basically an AK-47 round.
So let me ask you a quick question about the New York State compliance and whatnot. So some people might be looking at this and saying, okay, well, that's great. It's got the fixed mag and all that stuff, but, you know, it says in the New York Safe Act that it can't have like a bayonet lug.
Right.
So what's the deal with that? Doesn't this technically, because it does have a bayonet, does it not have a bayonet lug?
This has a bayonet and a bayonet lug,
right.
But because it doesn't take a detachable magazine, it's exempt from the New York Safe Act.
Oh, okay.
So stock, the SKS comes with a 10-round magazine. So 10-round fixed internal magazine.
Right.
So by definition, that exempts it from the New York Safe Act. So you could have a bayonet lug, folding stock, pistol grip.
Gotcha.
And there's a ton of aftermarket parts for this gun. Now, I'm more of a purist when it comes to these, and I don't like to bubba them up, as some people like to say, save them from bubba.
So tell me a little bit about, well, which one of these was your first gun?
Right, so I'm holding one in my hands. This is a Chinese SKS Factory 636.
And this is what got you into collecting?
Yeah. It did. And this was my second gun, actually. Like I said in a previous podcast, my first gun was an AR-15 that I had built.
Right.
And that's, a new production, cool and dandy. I wanted one. And it was actually, when I first got into guns, a lot of people have, like, the mystique about Chinese firearms because they were banned from importation in the 90s, thanks to the, Clinton administration. And since then, there's been we can't get him anymore. Oh, I really want one kind of mentality about it. And back in the day, people used to think that Chinese-made guns were junk, because of the mentality that we had coming out of Vietnam, coming out of Asia. At the time, the same thing was said about Japanese stuff, that they considered it junk.
Like the made in China.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
But the one thing that the Chinese did really well, aside from violating basic human rights, is make firearms. Because as a country that focuses on its national defense as the most important thing, they make guns really well. And these guns that they made, some were sent for commercial export, some were made for domestic military militia use. But they were made, even the semi-auto, like, for example, the AK-47s, the AKMs, the Chinese Type 56 rifles, assault rifles, I'll get into that a little later. They were made in the same factories on the same production lines as the military stuff, except they were semi-auto for the AKs.
Right.
So the same thing about these SKSs, they were true military-made firearms that they issued to the People's Liberation Army, militia units. They sent all over the world and exported.
Right. And you were showing me just before, some manuals and whatnot that I guess you'll talk about in a little bit. But manuals that were given out to civilians.
Right. Militia groups, Red Guards,
right.
and some PLA and PLA troops, People's Liberation Army. That's what the PLA stands for.
Right.
When I say that. The Chinese, post-World War II, after Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationals fell to the Communists, they had a lot of militia groups. They had a lot of people that weren't necessarily in the People's Liberation Army, but they were, because China's a huge country, right?
Right.
And they have all these militia groups in these different provinces, and they were given arms and manuals and training, basically saying, hey, you as a peasant farmer, you are part of the defense of this country from the imperial Western powers. So you're going to be given these rifles, and you're going to be given these manuals, and it's going to show you how to shoot and, and set booby traps and do whatever. So getting into now, for example, the people wonder why the SKS was really made to be, because originally it was developed in the Soviet Union.
Right.
And a few years after its adoption came the AK-47.
Yeah, what was it, 5 years?
No, less than that. This was introduced in 1945. The AK-47 was technically adopted in 47, but really put into mass production in like 49, early 50s.
Okay, right.
So there was some models that came out originally, but they had a lot of production troubles with the Type 1 Russian AK-47s. So the SKS represents an intermediate step in the process towards the development of a true assault rifle, being shorter and less powerful than the semi-automatic rifles that preceded it, such as the Soviet SVT-40, AVT-38 rifles, which are it's a big semi-automatic rifle that's chambered for the 7.62x54 rimmed round. So it's a semi-automatic chambered in the Mosin-Nagant cartridge for people.
So are these still produced new anywhere in the world? Or the ones that exist right now were only produced within like a 5-ish year time span, and then that's it?
It depends, because
I saw that this was what, like, I think you sent me like the 9th most produced firearm.
Yeah, this is the 9th. This is the 9th most produced rifle in the world.
Right.
And but the thing is, Russia and China weren't the only countries that made this. After World War II, the SKS design was licensed and sold to a number of Soviet communist-aligned countries, including China, Yugoslavia, Albania, North Korea, North Vietnam, East Germany, Romania, and Poland. Now, a couple of caveats on it. It's believed that Poland never domestically made their own. Right. Rather, they got Soviet and then Soviet Russian ones, and they kind of tweaked them a little bit, put them in different stocks, replace stocks if need be. And then North Vietnam. So North Vietnam SKS is kind of a sidebar, really interesting, because the debate is open as to whether they were domestically produced or they were produced from China and sent in. Some people say that, I was in a factory that produced SKSs, but they're very similar to Chinese SKSs in their appearance, their construction. They have they have the letter 1 in a star on the left side of the receiver that tells you that it's a North Vietnamese, but also there was a lot of handmade, crude jungle copies. Like, they literally handmade an SKS in the jungle.
Wow.
That soldiers found. So all these different countries use them. And to get back to your question, I want to say the most recent production ones were the Albanians and the Yugoslavians. The Chinese made them into the 80s and 90s for commercial export. I think they stopped making them militarily in the 70s, but then they started selling them to the U.S., and they made commercial variants that takes like AK mags or a paratrooper model with a shortened barrel. So they were
like
made...
a detachable AK mag?
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So they were made by China well into the 90s for commercial export to the U.S. and all over the world. But I believe the military models, like the last true military models, if I recall correctly, were made in like the 70s, like the late 70s.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think Albania and China were some of the last ones to produce them. The 3 rarest SKS variants are the North Vietnamese, like I said. East Germany made an SKS variant that was domestically produced. And the way you tell that, just by looking at it, is the stock has on the left side the sling bar like a Car 98K. So that's the easiest way to identify it. And then if it had a replacement stock or something, there's receiver markings on it that show East German markings.
Gotcha.
And then one of the cooler ones I think of is the North Korean SKS. That on the top cover, most people misidentify it as a Russian because it does have a star and a circle, kind of like a Tula marking almost. Tula, the Russian arms factory. Yeah. But some people might say, it's Chinese, it has a star, or it's this. But it has Korean writing on it, and it's North Korean. So those are the 3 rarest variants, and they fetch actually a lot of money. I think I saw a North Korean SKS sell recently for like $3,000.
Jesus.
Yeah, man.
Wow. So tell me about the one that you have.
So like I was getting back to, so this one, after I bought the AK, I really wanted AR-15. I really wanted something different. I wanted an AK, but in New York at the time, this was let's see, it's 2020 now. This is like 2010, I want to say. The New York AK, the AK market in general isn't what it was. Like, it wasn't what it was today.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of options in New York. I think we had the Wasser 10s. We had, I think, Arsenal out of Bulgaria made a New York compliant model, and that was really it. So, and then other than that, you had a Mac 90, a Chinese Mac 90 or an Egyptian Mahdi. Those were like the choices you had. So I was at a gun show out in Hauppauge, and I saw that this guy had a Norinco SKS on the rack. I'm like, oh, that thing's cool, man. It's Chinese, it's cool. I want it. So I paid at the time $325, which by 10 years ago prices might have been a little high, but it was kind of, on par for what they were going for, like $300, $200-ish.
Well, what are they going for now, like this right here?
It depends. I mean, recent imports, they were getting $350, $400.
Well, no,
bucks
I mean,
for
just like the one specifically that you have.
Honestly, I'd say probably this is like a $300 gun.
Yeah.
Like in today's prices.
Right.
So 10 years ago, I might have overpaid a little bit for it, but also it's New York, Long Island prices.
Well, and
everything's that too.
Right.
So I got it, and this one's interesting. It's a 1971 model, factory 636, and it has a 5-round flush magazine, which I don't know if it was imported with a 5-round magazine or if it was made installed afterwards, but it is a Chinese-made 5-round magazine, which I've come to learn they're very kind of hard to find, so it's kind of cool. And this gun actually is a gun that I bring I take with me when I bring people to the range to shoot for the first time. If I don't bring a 22, I usually bring an SKS because it's got enough power to it to where people realize I'm shooting a gun.
Right.
They know what recoil feels like, because I find a lot of times if you start people on a 22, it's good. It's like the best option to start on, but they don't understand what recoil is and recoil management. It's just to get them familiar with handling a gun. If you really want, like in my opinion, I think that this is a great gun to start people on. This one in particular only holds 5 rounds.
Right.
It is very easy to operate.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to shoot.
It is.
I've shot this one.
It is. And actually, when we went to the range recently, our friend we brought with to get him signed off for the CMP, I brought an SKS because I didn't have any ammo for the Garand at the time. And this is kind of similar to the way a Garand kind of operates. I'm not saying it's similar to the way it operates, but like, for example, the manual of arms. You lock the bolt back, you load it from the top.
Right.
The safety is by the trigger, which on the Garand it is too, so you have to learn trigger discipline as to not touch the trigger when you're putting on and off the safety. That's a biggie with these guns.
Right.
The safety is a lever right by the trigger, and it's very easy to, when you're flipping it down, pull the trigger.
Right.
So teaching that is a very, very good thing with these guns. So I've had this gun now for going on like 10 years, and I have a number of other SKSs as well, but this one, like I said, it was like really like my first true gun, like my milsurp, my first milsurp,
right?
And it really opened my eyes to a lot of things that were going on in the world with world history and things that happened in Vietnam post World War II, and then kind of got my love started of Eastern Bloc, communist, Cold War era firearms. Right. Because I knew really nothing about China. And during World War II, China was actually our ally. They were fighting against the Japanese. Right. They had a nationalist faction led by Chiang Kai-shek, and we were arming them and helping them to try and beat out the Japanese invaders and to set up China as a pro-Western ally in Asia. Right. A giant, country is China. Right. But we all know the way that went. The communist won. Mao Zedong wound up taking over, and China became arguably one of the biggest superpowers in the world. Right. Some people say that China actually has more of a global influence than Russia, even towards the end of the Cold War, but even after the Soviet Union fell. The Soviet Union fell, but China was still on the up and up in terms of arming the world, becoming a world superpower in manufacturing, technology. They're still behind the curve militarily on some things, but look around you. What's not made in China?
Right, pretty much everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So everything that a lot of stuff that we use today is made in China. Right. They are one of the world's superpowers in manufacturing, exporting, global trade, and unfortunately, violating people's human rights and killing people and, Now, one interesting thing I wanted to get into was the nomenclature of this specific SKS.
Okay.
So the Chinese had they call this a Type 56, but they also called their AK a Type 56, which they were both adopted in 1956, hence the name. But they they're both known as a Type 56. This is known as a Type 56 carbine. The SKS is known as a Type 56 carbine, and the AK is known as the Type 56 assault rifle. If you think of it like, for example, in the U.S. designating system, you have the M1 carbine and the M1 rifle. And then you have the M1 submachine gun, which is the Thompson.
Right.
All three have the same name. They just, one's a carbine, one's a rifle, one's a submachine gun.
Right.
Very different purposes.
Right.
After World War II, Germany was really the first, at the end of World War II, Germany was really the first country to have developed the assault rifle, the Sturmgewehr. And a lot of countries took note of a smaller, intermediate caliber that it's more powerful than a submachine gun, but a little less powerful than a rifle. But battle ranges were only at like maximum 300 yards, they figured. So they developed an intermediate round, and they basically, the assault rifle was meant to replace the rifle and the submachine gun.
Right.
But many countries still wanted a rifle because they realized that a rifle for more precise shooting is more desirable.
Yeah.
In some cases. So that led to countries having rifles, carbines, submachine guns, and handguns.
Makes sense.
So this really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I used to actually, believe it or not, I used to actually like really find history boring. And then when I started looking into it, I really started, this gun kind of was the spark that really ignited my love of history and then getting into firearms as a whole.
Right.
And I think a lot of people can get behind that as saying, oh, I had this old gun, I looked into the history, and I never knew this, and this happened because of that.
Yeah, once you start kind of digging into things, you start to learn shit. It's cool. I mean, and it kind of furthers your reason for being a collector.
Right.
Opens you up to other things that you might want.
Right. And the cool thing about the SKS is you still see these things in battlefields and conflicts, and they're all over. They're all over the world. Some people refer to them as the cockroach of weapons. It is a very handy light rifle. It was really good for guerrilla fighters because it's light, it's handy, it has a limited ammunition capacity, so you're not carrying around magazines and all these things that, you're going to spray bullets all over the place. It really helped the guerrilla fighter in many different countries because you could carry, you could travel light, carry a gun and some ammo, have some more precise shots, and then just get the hell out of there.
Right.
A lot of times in Vietnam, these were encountered. I recently saw an anecdotal story of on YouTube from the Mosin Crate, which is a guy that sells surplus firearms, and he had a Type 56 that was captured in Vietnam, and the soldier that brought it back, the story goes that there was a Viet Cong soldier shooting at him from the trees with an SKS. And he calls it sniping. Obviously, it's not like a sniper rifle like we would call today, but that was the act of covert, more precise shooting.
Right.
And the guy shot at him. The U.S. soldier shot at the guy, killed him. The bullet went through the stock of the gun, hit him in the neck. He fell out of the tree. The gun fell with him, and he took the gun home as a war trophy. You find that there's also different kinds of, more specifically Chinese SKSs. They were originally, adopted in 1956, and they were more closely styled after the Soviet design. So they had the biggest giveaway is a blade bayonet as opposed to a spike bayonet.
Right. These have a spike.
Right. These two examples have a spike bayonet.
Right.
And they went to the spike bayonet in the mid-'60s. About 1964, they changed over from the Sino-Soviet style to just the regular Chinese that we see here today, that a lot of people see. Now, getting into for what we were talking about earlier as a New York legal option, this is without a doubt one of the best New York legal collectible firearms there is, I think. And not even in terms of just collectability, but just general shootability, handling, the way they were made, the round that they take. I mean, if you think about it, like, you can have a New York legal AK, but it's got to be neutered, or it's got to have a 10-round magazine, which you could swap out a mag, and, detachable mags are great. This gun was originally made to have a 10-round magazine fixed in it, and you load it from the top via stripper clips. So you don't have to carry around bulky magazines to reload. Carry around 10-round stripper clips, charge it from the top, and keep going. In some ways, it's quicker because you don't have to remove a magazine, take the magazine out and then put another magazine in. This one, the gun runs empty, the bolt locks back. You take a clip, a stripper clip of ammunition, load it from the top, close the bolt, and keep going.
Right.
And it shoots the same round as an AK. Longer barrel. Some might say is a little more precise, but that's the ammunition you shoot is largely depending on that, and obviously you have to do your part with marksmanship. But in my opinion, it's just a great gun. They're everywhere. They can be found cheap. And back in the day, people tell me, "Oh yeah, I used to buy them by the crate. It was like $80 or $75 a piece, and it came with 1,000 rounds of ammo." And I'm like, "Oh shit."
Missed the boat on that one.
I know. But they're still cheap and plentiful, and there's millions of them in the country. And there's always, if you're a collector, there's many different interesting variants, even within the countries that they have. I have these 2 Chinese. I have 2 Yugoslavians as well. And one Yugoslavian I have, which I'll have to talk about in another episode, it's actually a conflict-used rifle, a partisan-used rifle that was used. Now, this is just me piecing together some history from the gun, but it was used by the Bosnians that were fighting the Serbians. Bosnian Muslims were fighting the Serbians in the breakup of Yugoslavia and the Bosnian Civil War. And this one was really cool because it was a field modified to be select fire by the Bosnians.
Right.
And it was, after the war, it was converted to semi-auto and then imported to the U.S., and they're very rare. But this represents a really good option for somebody who wants a rifle, who wants to be compliant, wants it to have a powerful yet plentiful and cheap source of ammunition, and to have things like a bayonet.
Right. So just like the M1 Garand. Yeah. That's something that you could buy and not really have to worry about it as far as compliance.
Right.
And this is the same idea.
Yeah.
Obviously the ammo for the M1 is a little more scarce and more expensive. So.
Well, it's more expensive, and nowadays in this pandemic, buying it's scarce.
Well, everything is every ammo. I went on some websites looking for 9mm, and they were out, like completely out.
Right. And 7.62x39 is a very common caliber, but now getting into a little more anecdotal history, back in the day, these were first imported in the U.S. Well, they weren't imported actually; they were brought back by GIs from Vietnam in the 60s. Nobody knew much about these guns. They were actually really rare. The ammunition was pretty much non-existent in the U.S. because there wasn't anything domestic that took that. It wasn't until, I believe, the 70s and the 80s when things like Chinese AKs, Valmet, Finnish Valmet M76 AKs were started to come in, that once the Cold War kind of was starting to trail off, the West was open to com-block rifles and ammunition. That's when these things really started to become more plentiful, more affordable. The ammunition became cheap, and people were really finding out that, hey, these are really good guns for the price.
So was yours used in, are you able to figure out if yours specifically was used in any sort of conflict? Or
I don't know. The Chinese made fucking millions of them.
Yeah.
I think I read a figure somewhere. It was like 18 million of these things the Chinese made over the production history.
Right.
This one, like I said, was made in 1971, and a lot of times these were made and then just put away.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then when China started exporting them to the U.S. for commercial sales, they're like, hey, we got warehouses full of these things. We don't have to produce any of them yet. We can just sell them our surplus because we're more into the AK now anyway.
Right.
Or even the Type 63, the Type 68, the Type 81, so on and so forth, the Chinese different firearms that they developed, rifles. So they're like, we'll sell them to the Americans and make money. Right. So that's pretty much what they did. So I don't know. I think this one was just probably a gun that just, was made and then put away and then nothing happened.
It's in good shape.
It is. This one's in good shape. It's used, and you could tell there's interesting variation. There's differences. For example, the rear sight block on this one looks to be like it's cast versus the rear sight block on that one looks like it's milled.
Okay.
There's little interesting differences that you could kind of pull apart between different SKSs and the variants. Now that one John is holding, that one is a military issue. You could tell because it has a rack number on the stock, and it has a triangle 2 stamp on the.
We'll put pictures of this on things. On
and
Instagram,
that one is
Facebook.
Unissued, unused. I never fired it. I bought it from somebody, and I cleaned the Cosmoline out of the gas piston tube. This thing was never fired since it was imported. I can pretty much guarantee that because the whole gas piston tube was filled with cosmoline.
Jesus,
and there's no way you could shoot that like that.
Right.
So that one I keep kind of more as a collector piece, and this one that I bought 10 years ago, I shoot. And I love shooting it. It's a lot of fun.
So you brought a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah,
so
I did.
let's talk a little bit about that.
I did. Now, I know this episode is kind of more Chinese specific, because that's honestly one of the more common ones that you're going to run across. Like I said, the Yugoslavian, probably after the Chinese, the next common one you're going to run across is a Yugoslavian. They have a couple of different variations. The M59 was the first production, which was kind of a copy of the Soviet design. Then they had the M59-66 and then the 56-A1, 66A1. The big thing with the Yugoslavians is that they have a blade bayonet and a grenade launcher with flip-up sights. So that's pretty cool. And they're very distinctive. They have a big, long grenade launcher in the front. That's actually also New York legal.
Wow.
Because
how?
Because it's a fixed magazine.
Yeah. it's crazy, right? How just that one thing can it's the same exact gun, shooting the same exact round.
Right.
The only difference is there's a pin.
Right. And there's a magazine that's fixed.
Right.
Now, for those who are savvy or who know about the SKS, the magazine comes out.
Yeah, I was asking Taylor before, like, let's say you're listening, you're not from New York, and you can have a larger capacity magazine, or you're law enforcement. Is there a way to actually put a larger magazine on this firearm?
Yeah, they're what's known as duckbill mags because they have to have an appendage in the front that locks into the cross bolt in the stock, which is the front of the magazine retainer.
Right.
So basically, you take the trigger group out, the magazine comes out, you put the trigger group back in. And then the duckbill mags, it's kind of like a rock and lock. You put them in the front, and then you lock them in the back, kind of like an AK. It's just they're a little finicky, and sometimes the quality is kind of on them.
Right.
But
it's doable.
Yeah, it is.
And it's easy.
It is. And then there was also some Chinese variants, the SKSD, the SKSM, that takes AK magazines from the factory from China.
Right.
So they fall into a weird area with New York because some of them have the full bayonet like on a fixed mag gun, and those are not legal in New York. But there's some that were imported as a sporter model
without
a bayonet lug and with like a Monte Carlo type stock that takes a magazine, and that's okay. But you just can't have the 30 round mags. You could get 10 round AK mags all day.
So that's an option too for people.
It is, and it's a different option too. If you don't want an AK, you want something a little different.
Right.
So that is an option.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So. People think I'm a little nutso sometimes about these things. I get really into it. And I brought with me today some artifacts from, I call them artifacts. They're, old.
They're like photographs
old
and manuals and maps.
Yeah. So
armbands.
Yeah. So I have a couple of Red Guard armbands here. And I get these are actual, I say artifacts because that's the technical term for them if you're like a museum guy or whatever.
Yeah.
But I have a couple of armbands here. One of them is from a work study, a farm work study group. Basically what they did in the Chinese Cultural Revolution was they took students from the cities, young people from the cities, and brought them to work out on the farms to be at one with the peasants, to understand the peasant struggle, and to realize that, wow, peasants and workers are what make our country great in China, And so the Red Guard, the Chinese Red Guard youth, which is similar in a lot of ways to the BLM movement today, communists, and so they wear these armbands in solidarity of Mao Zedong.
Right.
So, and then this other one here is a little bit more tattered and torn. It's I believe the translation, if I remember correctly, is the Mao Zedong thought propaganda. So they had propaganda which controlled your thoughts.
Right.
I have a manual here. This was issued, I believe, I don't want to say it's a PLA manual. I have to just double check my notes. I should have beforehand. But what it is, it's a manual that they give out, and it has all these different kinds of guns in there. And it shows you how to take them apart, how to operate them. So there's an SKS, an AK, an RPD, and it shows you how to use the guns, how to clean them, how to operate them. And then towards the end of the book, it has marksmanship training. So it shows you how to shoot, how to angle the shots, the curve of the flight path of a bullet, let's just say. And this is what they would hand out to militia groups, PLA soldiers, to say, hey, here's a gun, here's a booklet. We're going to show you how to shoot it, and if you ever have to defend China, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, like there's how to shoot at people with parachute that are parachuting down. There's this picture here. It's a guy holding what looks like an RPD, and then another guy holding the bipod up above his head, and they're shooting at a guy parachuting down, and it gives you the angles of how to shoot. Yeah,
that's cool as hell. Yeah, I mean, handing out these books and whatnot, I mean, this was effectively turning people who had no idea what they were doing with the firearm into maybe somewhat effective,
because
soldiers.
the peasantry, Mao Zedong, thought the workers and the peasants were the backbone of the country.
Right.
And they wanted to make sure that they were trained and armed, so that way the whole country is the army.
Is the army, right?
Right. I have.
Well, it looks like there's like some handwritten stuff in here. Yeah. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yeah, it is. I get these now. This sort of stuff isn't like rare or expensive, and that's another cool thing about collecting is you can.
Yeah, like how much can someone get this book for?
I found it on eBay. It was like $8.
Really? That's not bad. I mean, I'm sure they handed out like millions and millions of them, so they're probably everywhere.
But the fact that it survived all these years and it's used and
you could feel it's kind of flimsy but yeah, dude, page 83 on here has some handwritten notes in here. Unfortunately, we can't read them.
No, I have no idea what that means. Well, that looks like site markings.
Yeah, I was going to say it looks like distances.
Right, distances, 700, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then I have some pictures here. Now, this picture here, which I'm showing John, is allegedly from the Vietnam War. It's a NVA soldier rushing, I guess, into combat or something with an SKS
looks like
rifle.
There's almost an explosion behind them, dirt and whatnot. Well, we're gonna put pictures of this stuff up on the Instagram so you guys could look.
Yeah, but that's an actual battle photo.
Yeah, this is an original photograph.
Yeah, that's original. That's an original from the time. And then on the back, I have a couple of photos in that one. I don't think that one has an SKS in it.
No, it looks like AKs and then some American.
Oh yeah,
firearms.
That's also another photo from Vietnam, which I have in the same holder. It's I believe they're North Vietnamese troops running past dead bodies holding AKs and M1 carbines. They could be ARVN, they could be, but it's kind of hard to tell. That was part of the issue in Vietnam. You didn't know who you were fighting.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I have here also this picture. It is young women, and it looks like there's a guy at the end shooting the SKS, like the ones we have with the spike bayonet, militia training. And that's something that they did. These groups, these militia groups, they would train people, the citizenry, the peasants, how to use a gun. And it's cool because original photographic evidence still exists of that. So you could see actual SKSs used by militias, combatants, the PLA army, and you could, this is one thing that I really got into is history. I'm like, wow, this is an actual military issued gun that's New York legal that, spread all over the world.
Right. It's crazy that this is an original, legitimate photograph.
Yeah.
I mean, the border around it is cut out like it was in someone's photo album.
Yeah.
Like who would just like snap a photograph of this and like put it in their photo album? It's just like one of those weird things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could have been a family member. I mean, these were actual Cultural Revolution artifacts.
Yeah.
It could have been used for propaganda. It could have been used for, a newspaper. I mean, I have pictures here of soldiers holding firearms that looks like maybe they were used for a family member or, something.
Yeah.
Who knows?
That's cool stuff.
Who knows? Yeah, I got a bunch of cool stuff here. It really gets back into why I got passionate about firearms. This particular gun that I'm holding, this is why I got passionate about firearms.
Right.
And passionate about history, passionate about collecting, passionate about the things that are going on in the world.
Right.
In America, we tend to think that we're the only ones that matter, or things only happen to us.
Yeah, for sure.
But, it's alleged that during the Chinese Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, Mao Zedong killed 53 million of his own people.
Right.
Through starvation, famine, political executions, re-education camps. And it was a very eye-opening experience to learn about it.
So what else you got in there?
Oh, man. A lot of the stuff, it doesn't really pertain. I just brought a whole folder of just my collectibles and stuff. Yeah. Now, one thing that I was talking to John about earlier was this photograph. It shows PLA
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it shows PLA soldiers sitting in what looks like a parade or a presentation type event, and which was very common. They would have these political propaganda events, and they would have all these soldiers and banners. But this particular image is really cool because it shows the Type 63 rifle. Now, the Type 63 rifle, just getting in a little anecdote, it looks similar to an SKS. It looks almost identical to an SKS, except it takes a detachable magazine. The visual identifier that separates it from an SKS is that it takes a detachable magazine, and in the front of the gas tube, it has like a little dingus that sticks out. I think it's like a stacking rod or something for the gas piston. But the Type 63 rifle. I couldn't talk. I had a tongue twister there for a second.
A lot of numbers.
Yeah, I know, right? Because there's so many different designations.
Yeah,
and
right.
for example, I just want to make sure I'm correct on it. The
Yeah.
Type 63 rifle is a select fire.
Right.
It's an SKS AK hybrid. It
Right.
has the appearance and the handling of an SKS, but it has the rotating bolt assembly of an AK.
Right.
And it has
So it
an
could be
SKS
fired
trigger
full
rope.
auto.
Yeah, and it takes a 20-round detachable magazine.
Right.
There are, that I'm aware of, based on my research, there are none in private hands in the U.S. Only governments. I saw a video from the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, of a government demonstration showing U.S. Special Forces troops all these different communist captured weapons, or and all these different guns, and they actually had one of these guns, and they were showing how to shoot it. So I know there's at least one in the U.S.,
Right.
but it's probably in government hands.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. It was very hard to bring back any type of fully automatic firearm from conflicts post World War II.
Right.
And people did. And then,
Yeah.
they registered some of them in the amnesty in 68. And
Right.
there's still many of them floating around in people's closets and that people don't know about. So, what's your overall impression of the SKS, John? Because I've been talking about this. I'm like a windbag about this shit. But what is your impression? As somebody who doesn't have one, somebody
Right, I
who
don't have
maybe
one. Yeah.
only fired them because I brought them to the range, what's your impression of it?
I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm more interested in like American firearms. So it's a cool firearm, but I don't know if I would ever buy one.
Okay.
Personally, for myself. I mean, the history about it is pretty cool, but you also have to remember I can have things that other people can't.
Right.
So there's other things that I might be interested in. So I don't know,
Like
but
an
I think
AK.
I've shot it. I love shooting it.
Yeah.
It's an awesome gun. You know what it is? It's like Taylor was saying. It's not like shooting. It's easy to handle, but it's not like shooting a 22 where there's like no recoil. You still feel like you're shooting a rifle.
Right.
So I do like that aspect about it. I think our friend who shot it had a great time shooting it. I think this might even be like a great first gun for a lot of people.
Well, an AR was my first gun, but
Right.
it is a great first
Right.
gun, I think, for
Right.
people. It's limited capacity. It's legal in all 50 states.
Right. So you don't have to think about that. I mean,
No.
you could walk into a gun shop, and I'm sure there's plenty of them in gun shops around, especially on
There's
Long Island.
millions of them in the
Right.
country.
So, this is probably going to be an easier gun for you to find, locate, purchase, and all that stuff. You don't really have to think about, am I going to go somewhere and be arrested because of this?
Right. And it
all that
doesn't
stuff.
look like, it has a wood stock, and it doesn't look like a military rifle.
Yeah, it doesn't look like, you're going to walk down the street and people are going to think you're going
An assault weapon there.
to... Right, right.
Even though this is more, this is an actual military used gun, but it doesn't
Right.
necessarily spark that image with a lot of people. So
Right.
it kind of might soften the blow to people who might not totally be into firearms or might think that AR-15s and AKs are like the bad guy's gun.
Yeah, I just think that this is a good, like, entry-level option for a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah, I
Now,
mean...
recently they were imported. There was a whole bunch of them that were imported in the past year or two. They were Chinese Type 56 SKSs, early blade-style bayonets, and later spike bayonets as well. They were coming out of Albania, believe it or not. And this was really the first big batch of Chinese SKSs that we had imported since the 90s. And people now were being able to get them, buy them online from a store,
Right.
and have them shipped to an FFL. And
Right.
the prices were pretty reasonable. Honestly, they were coming in $300, $350. Now they're pretty much sold out everywhere.
Yeah.
And the prices on them are jacked up.
Right.
And they were in, honestly, some of them were in good condition, and a lot of them were in rough battle-use shape. Now, if you think about it, they were coming out of Albania, and Albania was a country. Now, getting into a little bit more history, I'm sorry if people, don't find this shit interesting, but
no, I mean, I think it's interesting.
Right.
It's the story of everything.
Well, let me backtrack a little bit. So, Chinese guns were banned for import from the 90s.
Right.
1994, Clinton signed an executive order banning Chinese firearms. Now, since then, we haven't been able to get them into the country. There is a law federally that says if a gun, like let's just say a Chinese gun, if a Chinese gun sat in a neutral country, like a NATO-aligned country or a neutral country, for more than, I think, 20 years, I think it is 20 years, then they're allowed to be imported into the U.S. because they're not
no longer considered
Chinese.
Right.
They're of that
They've been in
country.
the ownership of another country.
Right. So Albania at the time was aligned with, they were becoming a communist country, and they about in like the 50s, Albania became like a really hardcore communist country. They were disillusioned post-World War II with the way Nikita Khrushchev was taking the Soviet Union. They were de-Stalinizing the Soviet Union. So Albania looked to China and Mao Zedong for their vision of communism, Maoism,
Right.
because it was a more hardcore stance, and for lack of a better word. So China gave military aid to Albania in like the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and then Albania wound up producing their own SKSs with technical help from the Chinese in the 70s. We all know what happened in the 90s in Yugoslavia when Yugoslavia broke up, and or some people don't know, Yugoslavia broke up, civil war ensued, countries wanted autonomy, ethnic cleansing, genocide, the whole 9 yards. A lot of these guns were used in that conflict. And you'll see a lot of Chinese SKSs with trench art from these conflict zones in Yugoslavia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina. There's a lot of these that were actually used in combat.
Right.
And then they were, after the war was over in the 90s, these guns got scooped up, put away, whatever. And because they were in a neutral country, Albania, they were eligible to be imported into the U.S.
Gotcha.
So you could have a Chinese-made gun that was issued to an Eastern European communist country and then used in battle and then imported to the U.S. and now you could buy it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I find that to be, like, totally fucking awesome. Lack of a better word. Because it really gives it a soul, it gives it history. Like you said with an M1.
Right.
It has a soul. Well, some of these guns have souls on them.
Yeah, exactly.
And it really, if you're a military collector, you want something that was, obviously, if you don't have provenance paperwork, whatever, but if it has the town or a guy's name carved in a stock, you know that somebody named Nikita or whatever used that gun.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good gun for a lot of reasons. You know, I mean, it really appeals to a lot of people. It could appeal to the collector. It could appeal to the, someone who just likes rifles.
Right.
It could be a really good entry level gun. As far as like, let's say, as far as like a first time purchase, what's it like, the cleaning process and all that? Is it difficult compared to other firearms?
No, it is not. Some people compare it to an AK. There's a couple of more parts in an AK, but I mean,
parts of it look very similar to an AK.
It does. A lot of people confuse them for AKs, and that's something because the AK is so prevalent that it is confusing. So, for example, like the normal disassembly procedure for it, I'm not going to do it because I'm sitting in a chair. I don't have a table here, but you make sure the weapon is clear. You rack the bolt back, drop the magazine, flip the dust cover latch up, pull it out, pull off the dust cover, take the bolt carrier back, take the bolt and bolt carrier out, and then just like an AK, you have a little catch here on the right side of the gas block, and you flip that up, and that allows the gas tube to come out, and then there's a gas piston in there. Now, the biggest difference is with an AK, the piston is attached to the bolt carrier. The gas piston is attached to the bolt carrier.
Right.
On an SKS, it's spring-loaded, and it's separate. So the gas tube comes up, gas piston comes out, and for all intents and purposes, the gun is disassembled.
Right.
So you could clean it, do your maintenance. The trigger group really doesn't require any maintenance. It's just a contained unit. It comes out. And I mean, even you don't even have to take the trigger group out for just regular cleaning if you don't want to.
Right.
Depending on how hard you use it. But that's a really good thing. The bolt and the bolt carrier comes apart. It's actually a tilting bolt mechanism. The AK has a rotating bolt with lugs. This has a tilting bolt Simon-off system. So it's really easy to take apart. There's not a lot of parts to it. and it's a very rugged, robust firearm, just like a lot of communist designed firearms are.
Yeah, right. So does this have the same reliability as, like, I know an AK has like that reputation of being like you could throw it into like mud, pick it up, and shoot it. And
it depends on what your definition of reliability is. In the modern day, we have to look at it through the lens of the time.
Right.
Modern day tolerances, machining are a lot tighter, are a lot better than what these guns were designed for.
Right.
These guns were designed to have slightly looser tolerances in order to operate in adverse conditions.
Right.
The biggest drawback to an SKS compared to an AK is the fact that the bolt opens up from the top. And, the top is totally exposed to whatever can get in it.
Right.
An AK, on the other hand, is a dust cover and just a narrow channel on the side where dirt, mud, sand, whatever can really get in. Well, it can get in on
just
an AK.
Not as easily.
Right. So, for example, in SKS, if the bolt is locked open, you're exposing the barrel, the magazine, and you're not exposing the fire control group, which is a good part of it, but you're exposing everything. So, like, if you get mud in there and you try and, send the bolt home, and it's not going to go in a battery if there's blockages.
Right.
That is the biggest disadvantage of a gun with an open top system.
Yeah.
Now, the advantage of it is, like I said, quick reloading with stripper clips, carrying less weight on you. Right. You're not carrying magazines. And with any firearms design, there's a trade-off. And that's, the trade-off is reliability versus ease of manufacture versus robustness.
Right.
There's many different trade-offs with it.
Right. So, but as far as today's standards, I mean, we're not, these guns aren't getting dropped in the dirt and then immediately fired. And
but the good thing is they can be.
But
yeah,
I mean, I guess in a scenario where we talked about in our last episode, about civil unrest and all that. Not that I think that we're coming to civil war, but it's doubtful.
Well, let me tell you.
But if this wouldn't be a bad gun to have.
A gun like this. In SKS, and even some of these SKSs that people own, we're used in war. We're used in combat.
Right.
We're used in guerrilla fighting. We're used in adverse jungle conditions.
Right.
And they fucking work.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, to me, a gun like this, I would feel more comfortable with than, like a $400 PSA AR. That is why, for example, when we were talking about civil unrest, I grabbed an AK.
Right.
Over an AR-15.
Right.
I knew it was going to fucking work. I didn't have to worry about it.
You're going to pull the trigger, it's going to go boom.
It's going to go. Right. I didn't have to worry about, it doesn't like this ammo. The ejector's not quite right. Yeah. Some people get like really particular with shit. Yeah. If your gun can't run steel case...
that's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah, right.
You got to clean it. You got to make sure you get all the crap out of the chamber. But, I mean, these guns are just made to work.
Right.
They harken back to a totally different time. Like, this gun was designed in the 40s.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's still being used today.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's cool. But, yeah, in terms of reliability, this gun won't fail you.
So if I go buy one today, what are some of the things I can expect? Because you had mentioned that you had to clean the cosmoline out of the gun, and maybe some people out there don't understand why a gun would be covered in cosmoline, or what even is cosmoline. So.
Right. So cosmoline is a preservative grease.
Right.
That's really all it is. And when guns were put into deep storage, they're covered in grease so they don't rust, because that grease covers the metal.
Right.
It allows air. It doesn't allow air to contact.
Right.
So when you get a gun, I mean, even these guns that are coming in from Albania, they're caked in cosmoline.
Yeah.
They're just slabbed in it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might associate cosmoline with Mosins.
Yeah. Well, cosmoline is like a generic term for it. I mean, even the U.S. use some sort of cosmoline type grease to preserve their guns.
Yeah.
But the big thing is, whenever you get any new firearm, whenever you buy any firearm from anywhere, you always got to take it down, always inspect it, always make sure that it is safe to shoot. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, take it to somebody competent who can do it.
Right.
That's the big thing. So, for example, with the gun you're holding, when I got it, I completely disassembled it.
Right.
And like I said, the gas piston, the gas tube was packed with cosmoline.
Oh man, how'd you get it out?
Well, there's a number of good videos on YouTube on how to do it. Generally, heat melts it. Like if you have a hair dryer, because it's grease and it melts with heat.
Away, right?
I used solvents, brake clean, stuff like that, and honestly, just a rag just to physically remove it, push it out. Yeah.
It's a little bit of manual labor on that.
Yeah, it's a labor of love.
Yeah.
But you have to make sure that the barrel is completely free and clear of any obstructions, of grease, of anything.
Right.
So these surplus guns, expected to be a good time cleaning it, a good bit of time cleaning it and going through it and making sure all the components are in good working order, nothing's broken, because these are old guns.
Right.
Same thing with the M1s. When I got those M1s, it took me hours to go through every little part, take the rust off every little part, grease and oil every little part. You really have to get into it. And when you do that, you really know your weapon a lot better.
Of course.
Right. And I honestly, like, the SKS is one of my favorite guns. I really do have a soft spot for it. I'm singing its praises, and I've been talking mostly in this episode. But now, if you're collecting the SKS, the cool thing is, like I said, all those countries. I mean, there's plenty of variations out there. I mean, even alone in the Chinese SKS world, I think there's like over 50 variations you can collect. And then within those variations, you could collect battlefield pickups, Vietnam bringbacks. You can, if you want to get into guns that were used in Yugoslavian conflicts, there's guns that, if you're into trench art, if you collect guns with trench art, the SKS is a great gun for that. It's not terribly expensive.
Right.
And it represents, trench art and history being used.
Cool.
Now, the prices on them are going up because of all this pandemic crap.
Right.
I mean, I've seen the one type of SKS that I really want that I don't have at the moment is a Russian.
Yeah.
And they're going for crazy money right now.
Like what?
I mean, I see them on Gunbroker, $800,000.
Oh, my God.
Over that.
Wow.
I had a chance to buy one a few years ago for $600, and I thought, oh, that's a great price, but I just didn't do it.
You should have done it.
I know. There's a lot of things that I should have done. A lot of guns I should have bought. Those $99 Chinese Mosins.
By the truckload, dude.
I know. Spam cans of ammo for $90. I mean, woulda, coulda, should have.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of. I mean, I could always say I want all the guns in the world, but when it comes to this, I mean, SKSs and Mosins were really like my collecting forte for a good part of my time collecting guns.
Sure.
And like I said, I would like a Russian SKS because that's where it kind of all started. And then to collect the progressions, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to own a North Korean or an East German or a North Vietnamese just because I don't have $2 or $3 grand laying around. Unfortunately, they would be nice.
maybe one day.
Maybe one day if I sell a bunch of other shit. But they they do pop up from time to time. I think honestly the most. Like I said, in terms of rarity, the East German is probably the top, then followed by the North Korean, then followed by the North Vietnamese, and then after that is the Albanian. Now, the Albanian SKS is interesting because it is similar to it's more similar to a Chinese, but they change a lot of things. It has a spike bayonet. It has a different charging handle.
Right.
The fore end is longer, so the wooden fore end is longer than a Chinese SKS, and the stock design is slightly different. Other than that, it's very similar to just a regular Chinese SKS.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I also like about this gun, as a first-time purchase, is it's not too heavy.
No,
it's pretty light for what
handy.
it is. It looks like it would be heavy as hell, but I feel like it's just the right amount of weight where it really doesn't matter what size you are, you can handle it.
No, it's very handy compared. Now, remember, again, this was designed in the 40s, so a lot of things are very different compared to today's standards with modern polymers, plastics, different metals. But yeah, this is a very handy rifle.
Yeah, I mean, it's got weight to it, but it's not overbearing.
Right, and it's firing a .30 caliber cartridge, so you want a little bit of weight in order to buck some of that recoil.
Right. Yeah.
But I think for a first-time gun buyer, especially in the New York market, this represents a great option for semi-automatic, intermediate caliber rifle with cheap ammunition. I mean, pandemic pricing aside, you used to be able to get
that will go back down.
Yeah, you used to be able to get 1,000 rounds of 7.62 by 39 for like $200.
That's not bad
with
at all.
Free shipping.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
Right. So buy a cheap stack of deep, man.
Right.
So I happen to think that with all the history I've learned and with everything that I've really gone through, this was the start of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm never really going to get rid of this rifle. I think everyone should have an SKS.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I will buy one.
I mean, John.
I mean, I'm holding it, and it's it's kind of growing on me.
It is. It's one of those guns that's recognizable. It's not as recognizable as an AK or an M1 or an M16, but you still see it in conflicts all over the world, man.
Yeah.
I mean, they were used in Syria, Iraq. I mean, from when they were made in the early 40s till now, they're still being used and picked up, and it's incredible. And it's definitely a very interesting weapon.
So on the stock at the end, there's like a little compartment. Is there like cleaning kit in there?
Yeah, you have a provision like this one I have has a cleaning kit, so it springs out.
Yeah.
And they have, you put a cleaning kit in, you have to make sure you don't trap your finger in there.
Yeah.
But it's very similar to an AK in that sense where, I mean, it almost looks similar to an AK with the way the cleaning kit is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure the exact dimensions of the rear of the stock or the base of the stock plate here.
Right.
But it's similar to an AK, at least the Chinese,
Cool.
But yeah, it's definitely... the more you kind of dive into it, the more you realize, oh, this is cool, and the sling swivel's here, and for this reason, and it has a bayonet. I think the bayonet is cool as hell. The bayonet folds out, and
just locks out, huh?
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Bayonets are scary as hell. I mean, when all else fails, you got something to stab somebody with.
Yeah, pretty much.
That is a very ominous thing.
Yeah.
This bayonet in particular, the Chinese spike bayonet, it's triangular.
Right.
Because the wound is harder to close.
So let me ask you this: have you gone to the range and fired it bayonet open?
Hell yeah.
People must look at that and be like, I can't believe, like, how can they have that in New York? And if you look at it, it does look mean as hell. It looks like you just shouldn't be allowed to ever have it.
Some of the best things in life are the things that you can't have, John.
Yeah. I mean, it's just funny, like
right.
Going back to like all these silly laws. It's like people will say, oh, you can't have this, you can't have that because it's it's really deadly, but you can have this because simply because it has a fixed magazine
they could ban an AK-47 by name and by features, but they can't ban this.
Right.
And I mean, they could try.
Yeah.
But what's so evil about it? It's got a wood stock, a fixed magazine.
It really doesn't fall into the categories of the narrative.
Right. Right. It doesn't look scary in the eyes of the gun grabbers.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, how many drive-by bayonettings are there, John?
I mean...
Do you know of any?
I don't know. There's a lot of stabbings, though, places.
Yeah,
I mean, can you imagine someone got just like on the street got stabbed with a fucking bayonet on an SKS?
I want to know. I want to know the backstory on that.
Yeah, I'd want to know, too.
But... I think, I think this was a good topic for today, man.
Yeah, for sure.
I really do. I really hope people, when they have a firearm or when they really get into it, that they kind of learn a little bit of the back history about it.
Yeah.
It'll open their eyes to the world. One thing that this really did, and I know I'm kind of rehashing this a little bit, but one thing that this really did for me was make me look into the past, back in history, to better understand the present. A lot of things that were going on in these countries that this gun was used in are repeating themselves today.
Yeah, which could be kind of scary.
Right. I sent John an article, well, maybe we'll put it in the show notes, of the Chinese Red Guard and how similar it is to all the chaos that's going on in the United States today. The person in the article says America's Cultural Revolution is similar to the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And it's one thing that you get a better understanding and appreciation of what's going on today because of what happened in the past. And you could kind of see the outcome of it. If things keep going the way they're going, what's going to happen.
Right. And some people want it to go that way, man.
They do.
Which is like even more scary.
Yeah, it is. It is, man.
It could be terrifying.
I know. I don't want to be part of 53 million people dead by the hands of my own government or by
I'm hoping
communist insurrection.
Yeah. I mean, we could sit here all day and be like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But I mean, it could. I mean, it's unlikely, but it could.
Right.
It could happen if the wrong people, get into certain positions of power and pass certain laws and policies and
this is why we have SKSs. Like you said earlier, when people go upstate New York and the trees start singing "Country Roads Take Me Home."
When they go up to riot in upstate New York and the trees around you start singing "Country Roads."
I thought that was fucking hilarious.
Funny meme like that, but yeah,
fucking hilarious.
So, I guess that's it for today, Taylor. Yeah. Thanks for bringing the SKSs over. They're pretty cool. We're gonna put pictures of the SKSs. We're gonna put pictures of some of the stuff that Taylor talked about. As far as his other artifacts.
Right.
and
I think a future episode we're gonna be highlighting some other SKSs too. One future episode that I'd like to do is, like I said, conflict use rifles. I said in a previous episode, I have a rifle that's at the gunsmith still. And it was used in the Kosovo Liberation Army. That, along with the Yugoslavian partisan rifle that I have, I feel like that would be a really good episode to showcase them.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, in the future. I don't know when I'm getting that other gun back from the gunsmith, but at some point in the future.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right, John.
All right, Taylor.
Good talk, man.
As always, thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to today's episode at the NYGunGuys podcast. We do release a new episode every Monday. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook at NYGunGuys. Please give us a like, a follow, and a share. If you have any feedback or a suggestion for a future episode, definitely send us an email at info@nygunguys.com. We'll see you next time. Be safe out there.